forever. People burn things for a lot of different reasons, but this particular case involved 9 people. 8 of them were actual arsonists, and then the ninth person joined in later on, and I'll explain that. But can you imagine in the 1980s that 3 police officers, one a Boston cop, 2 of them were Boston housing police officers, a full-time Boston firefighter. 2 of the guys were actual firefighters also, a owner of a security company, and a couple other guys that wanted to be firefighters in their lives. They joined together in this major conspiracy. Now, why did they do this? Proposition 2.5, and I'll explain that in a minute too. I think you can see my book right behind me. I have 1,000 hardcover books in my library at home, and I posted mine right here behind me, but also it's right here in my hand. I just want to explain a couple things. For those who have read it already, thank you very much. And I think after this presentation, several of you might want to read it who haven't already done so. On the cover, this photograph was taken by Greg Bemis, one of the arsonists in this case. And I actually give him credit on the back of the book. The cover was designed by my son-in-law, Mike Clark. He did a great job front and back. He also did my website, burnbostonburn.com. I want to explain, it says the largest arson case in the history of the country, and there's a period after. I probably should have had Mike put quotation marks around that. That is an actual quote from our former U.S. Attorney and former Governor, Bill Weld. He was the U.S. Attorney back in 1982. So when this case came down, it was in the newspapers when the arrest happened, he said this was the largest arson case in the history of the country. And it very well, everybody knew at that point, as far as anybody knew, it was the largest arson case. Now, you might have heard of John Orr. I've seen that on TV. John Orr was an individual out in California in 20, 25 years. As an investigator, he was setting fires, and a lot of wildland fires. John might have set 1,000 fires, but he never confessed. It's only guessing how many he really set. He's in prison for life because 3 people died in 2 of his fires. Also down in Washington, D.C., much later than this case, in the 1990s, Thomas Sweat was arrested by a combination of Washington fire investigators and ATF. Thomas was acting alone, and he admits to about 350 fires. Now, we have 264 building fires. Now, people set fires to woods, grass, wildland. They set fires to cars, dumpsters, etc. We have 264 buildings in this case, plus we have hundreds of dumpsters. So the actual number is a lot higher than the 264. But it's still a quote from Bill Weld. I would like to read to you folks just the dedication page. It's something I've done at all of my presentations. I came up with this dedication in about 5 minutes time after writing the book. You know, a lot of people dedicate to their wives and families, that type of thing. This just came to me, and the words that came to me in that 5-minute period are the words that are written here today in 4 lines. To all those who have been victims of fires, to the firefighters who fight them, and to the fire investigators who go the distance, may you all have the strength to carry on. It really epitomizes this story. The fire victims are people who lost homes, businesses, jobs, and those who are injured. In this case, over 200 firefighters, and I'll explain why firefighters and not civilians. To the fire investigators, I worked as a fire investigator with ATF for 20 of my 25 years, working fires and explosions. And as a certified fire investigator, I had to work about 50 fires a year on average to keep my certification, which was yearly. After that, I worked 18 years on the private side, and I averaged between 50 and 75 fires a year. So it's about 2,300 total incidents that I've worked in 38 years. I know investigators all over the country and in Canada, and it is hard work. You're out there in all types of weather. You're out there digging in unsafe conditions. There are so many cancer cases from breathing in bad stuff. And it's hot, it's cold, it's icy, and you have a lot of strenuous work to figure out what caused a lot of these fires. I did love it. I loved it from the beginning. I loved it until the very end, which I have only done one fire scene this year because I am basically retired from that business. Um, 2 years ago, I started writing this book about 2.5 years ago. A Boston Globe reporter wanted to write something in the Sunday magazine, and he contacted myself and three other people. Another U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorney, and my supervisor, and we had a meeting. During that meeting, he said he might like to do a larger project, such as writing a book. I had been thinking about this for a long time, but I was working full time on my private job. And the very next day after meeting with him, I started typing. That was the championship year for the Red Sox. In the background, we'd have the Red Sox game. My wife reads a lot as part of these books behind me. And I typed away and banged away every single night. I think I missed 24 days in 2018. And by Christmas, the actual first draft was done. Then the editing took a couple of 3 months. I've read this book now 6 times. It is also on audio and it's on Kindle. And when you do an audiobook, you have to read the entire book to the producer who actually, his voice that you would hear if you purchased the book that way. So I totally enjoyed the writing process. The publishing process is virtually organized crime, in my opinion. It's very difficult. If I signed a contract with an agent today, the agent still has to get a publisher, and then it might be 18 months before the book sees a shelf. From the minute I started to the time it saw a shelf was about 20 months. It was, as a matter of fact, August 17th is the anniversary of this book coming out last year. And you will see on my website, I just posted it an hour ago. I sold 5,000 books as of this week, which I'm very proud to say, and I really thank all the people who purchased the book. So I put on my website, I actually reduced the price of the book, which was $29 for the hardcover to $25, and $20 for the paperback, which is reduced down to $15, and that's including the mailing costs to you. And I sign the books if it's on my website. If you order them from Amazon, I was happy to see it got on Walmart and Target on their website, but those books will not be signed. So that's enough trying to sell the book for right now. I've met so many people in the past couple of years, people I hadn't seen or talked to in 25, 30 years. This case is 35 years old now. And so many people have contacted me through my Facebook, which is also burnbostonburn.com. And these people have given me a lot of other insights from people whose fathers were firefighters in Boston who are now passed on. And they told me different stories about their dads. I had one person contact me. They said, we did a genealogy test recently. And after a little hesitation, I read further on, and one of the arsonists was actually the woman's father. And she just found that out a couple months ago. She wanted to know if I had more information on him that I could pass along to her. Another person told me about some hideous activity on part of one of the arsonists, who is now a convicted pedophile also. So there's been a lot of contacts from people all over, and it's been so much fun. You know, in this tough business, it's often hard to find levity, especially when you're talking about 264 buildings that are being torched, people getting injured all the time. But if I tell you some jokes or anything like that along the way, I hope you understand that's just part of the psyche of investigators too. I wish I could see your faces. You know, this is a little bit tough doing this virtually. I did put a nice shirt on. I have long pants on. I shaved today, combed my hair, showered for you guys, that type of thing. So I'm doing the best I can as far as virtually talking to you all. But I can't see your faces. I can't get your reaction when I say something. Like how many people knew about this story? How many people maybe lived in Boston back then or had relatives in Boston? Besides the city of Boston, these guys set fires in 5 other counties surrounding the city. Aaron, I'm going to share the screen so I can go to the slide presentation. And if you give me a second, the first slide is just the cover from the beginning. There we go. Very good, folks. So I don't know if you might have seen Chronicle. Chronicle did a full half-hour show on this story. It came out in November originally, and then they had it again, a repeat in February. And that particular episode, by the way, was nominated for an Emmy, a New England Emmy award, but it did not win, but being nominated is pretty cool. I do a lot of these classes, and I did a lot of presentations already. I did 34 prior to March 1st when everything got shut down. And I started traveling near and wide. I had just finished Reno, Nevada just the week before. I was due in Georgia the week after. I got canceled out of Arizona, Maryland, Philadelphia, Indianapolis, and today I got canceled out of Chicago for September. So it is different doing it this way, but I have this map just to give people an idea. Boston, Chelsea's on this map just to the north, Somerville, Cambridge, and down as far as Quincy, Milton, down to the bottom of the screen, and Needham and Wellesley, Weston to the left side. The reason I did that, you're going to see on the next slide, the reason why. And these guys started setting their fires shortly after Proposition 2.5 passed. November 4th, 1980, the citizens of Massachusetts voted Proposition 2.5, which was a tax cutting measure, and held your property taxes to 2.5% of the assessed value. So a $100,000 house would have taxes on it no higher than $2,500. But what happened when it started going into effect in 1981 and 1982, the cities and towns all over the Commonwealth did not understand, could not calculate how bad a hit they would take from reduced revenue from taxes. So what usually happens? The usual suspects start getting laid off, your school teachers, police, and firefighters. Understand that Boston had 1,700 firefighters in 1980. By mid-1982, they lost 600 firefighter positions, 400 through layoffs, 200 through a rapid attrition program. 21 fire companies, firehouses, were closed throughout the city of Boston. So this crew of characters, they knew each other because they were also fire buffs. Brief explanation on fire buffs. They're legitimate organizations such as the Boston Sparks Association, which has been around 100 years. Box 52 has been around for 100 years. There's other ones all over the country. Clubs. These people are hobbyists relating to fires, fire equipment, fire memorabilia. They collect items. The Fire Museum in Boston is just down from the Children's Museum on Congress Street, and it's free. They do ask for a donation if you walk in, but it is free, and there is a lot of cool stuff there that goes back 100, 150 years. Um, but so these hobbyists collect, and they also like to go to fires and take pictures of the fires, and they like to watch the firefighting operations. They like to see how the firefighters handle a certain situation. They like to see if they beat that fire or the fire beats them. So there's groups that are fire buffs have a nickname, Sparks, and a derogatory nickname called Sparkies. Some people actually believe Sparkies are arsonists. It's a name that's not fond by the Boston Sparks Association. They like Sparks okay and fire buffs. So I do have a lot of those people who are my biggest backers, and they didn't like that I had put Sparkies in the book a lot, but that was the terminology used by the arsonists themselves. Now, if you read this book, you will see that it reads a lot like fiction. There is dialogue in this book. Why? Because Greg Bemis, master arsonist who was present for 260 of the 264 fires, when he finally got arrested and finally decided to confess, I spent 200 to 400 hours with Greg. He told me a lot. We went to every single fire scene, no matter what it looked like. Vacant lot, building still a hulking, torched out structure. No matter what it looked like, we went there and we recorded Greg telling me what they did, what they saw, how they placed the device, and how they set certain fires. And I spent all that time with them, and then we prepped for trial too. So 200 to 400 hours I spent with Greg. Then when he went to prison in 1985, he sat down and wrote a 165-page single-space typed journal, which I have, and he has been gracious enough to let me utilize this. It is their conversations. It's what they did. It's what they were thinking. So I have incorporated that into the book and interweave that with the activities of we fire investigators, of us. Yeah, us. I like proper English. Um, the investigators. And so it tells pretty much a complete story. So Proposition 2.5, when it started going into effect, there were layoffs everywhere. These guys used to meet at a Hojo's parking lot near fire headquarters. And they met each other there. And they became friends. Greg Bemis himself, his mother passed away when he was only 16, 17 years old. His father moved to Maine and left Greg behind as a senior in high school to stay with a friend's family. Greg was very close to his mom. His mom introduced him to fires. She brought him to firehouses, and he loved equipment, and he knew he wanted to be a firefighter. By the time he was 6 or 7, 8 years old, he had fire radios, and he was listening to Boston, and he wanted to be a Boston firefighter, a Jake. A Jake is a good term for Boston firefighters. It came from the key that they opened the fireboxes with, called a J key, and it was shortened to Jake. Boston fireboxes, by the way, were invented here in Boston, the first city to actually use fireboxes. The ones that are on the pedestals, you still see on the side of the streets. They used to be on poles, sides of buildings, etc. The slide that you're looking at right now, when these guys joined together, they said the only way we're going to get the people to pay attention is to start setting fires. They started with some dumpsters in the back bay. Imagine, you know what Storrow Drive is. If you're on Storrow Drive and you're looking on the Boston side, right, the row right behind you, there's a dumpster behind every single brownstone. These guys would set dumpster after dumpster, just running down the street with the car and throwing a little matchbook and cigarette in there and setting each one on fire. They didn't get any press out of it. They didn't get any uproar. So they graduated to buildings. They said they wanted to be safe, so they hit abandoned buildings. You wouldn't believe how many abandoned buildings in 1981, 1982, 1983. Not like today. You can hardly find an abandoned building in Boston prior to the virus here. and there's not even a vacant lot almost any place in Boston. So this actual crime spree could not even occur today for that reason, but there's many other reasons why it couldn't occur. So these guys started setting fires, and the first 107 are listed here with these pins. This is only 107 out of 264. The first 107 were almost all in Boston. Down to your lower left, you see 103, 107. That's right on the Dedham Boston line. And up to the north, where you see 10 and 40, that's up in the area of Chelsea, Revere, Everett. And to the left side is just in the Brighton and pushing out just beyond the city limits. So the first 107 were here. I didn't post all the other ones. They started spreading out to Quincy. They spread out to Cambridge, more in Everett, Chelsea, Revere, and then to play with us investigators, to make us run amok like chickens with our heads cut off, they went to Lawrence and set 3 multiple alarm fires in one night. A multiple alarm fire is a large fire. If you have a single alarm, they call that a working fire around here. And, you know, that's a fire where the firefighters realize they do have to do some work and put some water on the fire to put it out. But when you get a second alarm, third, fourth, all the way up to 9 alarms, these guys were setting multiple alarm fires every single week. Lawrence had the 3. Lowell, I think, had 3. They went all the way to Fitchburg and set 4 multiple alarm fires in one night. They went to Canton 2 different times, set 2 fires in Canton. They wanted to terrorize the citizens of Boston in an effort to get an uproar to the press. So the press would put it out, the media would cover this. And then maybe Kevin White would do something about not using firefighters and police as pawns in a political game that was going on. These were Robin Hood style. I call these guys like a twisted version Robin Hood. They weren't stealing from the rich to give to the poor. Instead, they were setting fires so firefighters could have their jobs back. And maybe these guys could get hired someday as Boston firefighters, besides the one who was a Boston firefighter who almost got laid off. A Boston cop temporarily got laid off, but he had wanted to be a firefighter also. The 2 other guys that became Boston housing cops, one really wanted to be a firefighter all his life, and the other one came from Acton and Stowe. That was Greg Bemis, and he was a call firefighter out there, plus he worked dispatch for Acton and Stowe police and fire. So that's the first 107. Here's their first fire. This is Thetford Street in Roxbury, and this is typical of what Boston firefighters encountered by the time they got there. Pay attention to that building on the left, that brick 4-story that's boarded up. You're going to see that one a little bit later on. These guys came up with a device. Greg actually came up with the device, and he learned it in a fire academy class. Now, I can tell you this device today because this is the 2020. And in 2020, we have the internet, and you can learn about any device you want, bombs or incendiaries. You can go on the TV show, you can go to the court documents, you can go to the book. It all has descriptions of the device. So I'm going to tell you what it looked like. I don't have a picture of it because I didn't want to teach everybody everything, but these guys would walk down the street with a lunch bag, a brown paper bag. Inside that lunch bag was a Ziploc plastic baggie with about a pint of Coleman lantern fuel, very volatile. Zip that closed, put it in the bottom of the bag, put a little tissue on top of it. Then they would take a matchbook with a cigarette lit at the last moment, interlaced into the matchbook, leaving it at a certain length. It's a time delay device that they could get away for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, depending on how you put that cigarette. Once it hit the matches, it ignites the matches, the paper bag gets going, the tissue gets going, the baggie starts melting, and the gases from the volatile liquid then ignite. They would put that up against the outside of a lot of these buildings. Do you realize how many buildings, not only vacants that we have, triple deckers or three deckers? Firefighters said, don't call it a triple decker. That's actually a sandwich. Call it a three decker. And how many two families and three family buildings we had. But the outside siding, back in the 1940s, a lot of the siding was asphalt shingles, which you see up on the roofs of so many houses today. But the siding right down to ground level had these asphalt shingles. It's just nothing but solid gasoline. You could put a match to it virtually and get it ignited, and then it would race up to 2 or 3 stories to the roof line in a matter of minutes. Well, with the addition of this little accelerant from their device placed up against the gas shingles, you will see how fast it can get up to the roof line. That's another view of the same fire. Down on the bottom right, you can see Bill Noonan fire photos. Bill Noonan was a Boston firefighter for about 35, 40 years. He was a photographer for 30 of those years. And let me tell you, Bill took some fabulous pictures, and you're going to see a lot of those pictures. That's a 3-story, 2-family. This one here, this is an important day. This is on Dorchester Ave, Dot Ave. And the fire is set. You can see the alleyway between 2 buildings that is lit up very bright. They went right in that alleyway and set the device, and it went right up the side of the building, and it actually got the building onto the right going also. As you can see, the upper floor and roof is involved at this point because it carried inside the building. June 3rd, by about that time period, they had been getting some press, but they graduated from that to something else. I'm gonna switch over to a video for a moment. And I'm gonna shut my volume. Can I shut volume down and you people still hear me, or you're gonna end up hearing that? I'm not sure.
Do you want them to hear the video or?
No. Can you hear me still, Erin?
Yes, so there should
Good.
be a mute button.
Yep, I shut the sound off to it.
Excellent.
This is Sparrow Toy Company. This is set about an hour after the Dot Ave fire. That was a multiple alarm fire on Dorchester Ave. This is a 1,000-foot warehouse. They now graduated to commercial structures. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, coincidentally, their first fire, these guys who set these fires, their first fire was February 18th, 1982. And because cities around the country were burning, Congress got the federal government involved to help state and local authorities to combat the arson problem around the country. They had 4 arson task force: LA, Chicago, New York City, and Boston, because Boston had a reputation for lots of fires. In the 70s, there was a big arson problem, and it carried into the 80s. We normally work on commercial structures. The law reads that it has to be a building that affects interstate commerce for us to work on it. And prior to 1982, we actually had to show that a device could explode or a bomb was used. But in 1982, President Reagan, who was also elected on the same day as Prop 2.5 came in, he signed into law, he changed the wording: if you just damage or destroy a building by means of explosion or fire. He added 2 words: or fire. I'm going to stop that video for a second so I can catch up talking to you.
Wayne, we didn't see the video. I can share it if you'd like.
Oh, you didn't see it? Okay. What do I have to do do I have to share that with you, or do you have to?
I can share it. Let's see.
Do I have to hit share again?
Nope, I've got it up on the screen now.
Okay. June 3rd, yeah, June 3rd, 1982. So this building's 1,000 feet long by 300 feet wide. A lot different than the two-family or triple-decker. If you see firefighters with a wall, a wooden wall that came down, it's the only wooden section of the whole building. And that's actually where the device had been placed. Ground level against that wall. It had tar paper on it right there. And it carried up inside one of the large industrial fans at the top of the wall and got inside the building. This building was full of pallets with cheap imported toys from China. Way back in 1982, they were stuffed toys and plastic toys in boxes. What a fuel. So once it got in there, it was very difficult. This went to a full 9 alarms. That's the largest fire that you can have in the city of Boston. And they have special call for mutual aid from surrounding towns and cities. You can't get any bigger than that. Plus, they were all busy on the Dorchester Ave fire previously. As you can see, this could be seen for miles and miles. And these guys, all these fire buffs would come back and watch these fires. You're going to see other videos where people are standing in the crowd. That's not uncommon. It doesn't make them all arsonists. It's, you know, if you pass an accident, you turn your head and look, or if you see a fire. How many fires have you seen in your lifetime of a building? Very few. So it's something that draws people's attention. They set 20 some odd fires in the month of June, and now it's already the 4th month into the spree. So I was saying the Boston, can you pause that also? If it's the end of that fire? Erin, can you pause that?
Yes, I took it off the screen.
Okay. So ATF started the arson task force in Boston on the first week of March, 1982. What a coincidence that these guys set their fire and began their fire spree 2 weeks before the arson group in Boston. We didn't know about them. They didn't know about us at the time. But these fires started hitting in the spring of 82, into the summer of 82. A lot of late Thursday night, Friday morning. And the press started picking up the Friday night firebug, they started calling it. And they kept that pattern for a while until we started doing lots of surveillances around Boston with Boston Arson Squad and Boston Police. We all teamed up and we spread out in certain areas. We were in South Boston on top of commercial buildings with binoculars and radios, talking to crews down below who were in mobile units. And those mobile units would stop people in the middle of the night going through South Boston or something in the industrial area, because at 2 or 3 in the morning, what are you doing in that area a lot of times? So people got stopped regularly, but it didn't get any place because they had inside information. Ray Norton was a Boston firefighter for about 10 or 12 years during this time period. And he had gotten injured, so they put him in Boston Fire Headquarters where the arson squad was. And he cleaned at night and stuff like that. So he had access to people who didn't know he was an arsonist or involved with arsonists. And he could also keep track of the arson squad, how busy they were on Thursday night, Friday night, how many vehicles they're putting out in the street. And he would let these guys know. And that's why they started going to all these other towns. Okay, so Erin, you can let it run, and I'll just talk about the different fires along the way.
Sure. Do you want me to share the video again?
Yes, please.
Sure.
So during this whole spree, again, they would do 20, 30, up to almost 40 fires in a month. They would go out on that Friday night, set 2, 3, 4. Till June 11th, 1982, they set 7 multiple alarm fires in one night. Altogether, there were 11 fires they set, but a couple of them were sort of duds. They didn't really amount to anything. And there were all types of buildings on June 11th, and everybody was busy. They were all, coming in from miles away, from Arlington, from Canton, Dedham, Cambridge, Quincy, from 10, 15, 20 miles away. The last fire they set that night was discovered by the chaplain of the Boston Fire Department. And the first unit to respond actually came from Norwood. They didn't know where they were going, but you didn't have GPS back then. They had to get directed into where this fire was. Again, you're looking at spectacular flames from a house fire at this point, probably. These guys got so crazy along the way. They started stealing those fireboxes I talked about. One night, tell me when, Erin, tell me when you get to this large brick building with flames coming out of the upper floors.
We are there now in the Bartlett building. Is that correct?
Yes, the Bartlett building, exactly. That was in Bartlett Square, and they didn't actually set this one. Now, these videos that you're watching are actually by Nat Whittemore. He was a WBZ videographer, cameraman for 35 to 40 years. Nat is, aside from my wife, Nat is my biggest supporter. He is a member of the Boston Sparks Association, and he has gotten me so many things. He got it on Chronicle. He got it. He's gotten me several speaking engagements. The reason we kept this fire in there is because this fire was discovered before daylight, and you can see it's fully daylight now, in a dangerous situation. Because the Boston firefighters have been busy all night long already, the guys are tired. They're strung out still at other fire scenes. Now, why is he running at this point? Well, as you can see, there's a collapse going on. And how dangerous it is. When the ladder truck is being moved, he's not retreating, he's just repositioning. But you can see how dangerous situation this particular fire was. And it's right next to the elevated train. And the T had to be shut down for a couple of 3 days while they tore the rest of this building down. But they started stealing these fireboxes for multiple reasons. One, they wanted it as collector items, say. Two, if you took the box, nobody could report that fire. Now, these fires were set in Dorchester, Roxbury, Southie, Charlestown, Jamaica Plain, mostly at that time, and down a couple in Eastie and a couple in Hyde Park, a couple in the Back Bay. Erin, have you gotten to September 11th yet?
Yes, we are just getting there now. Would you like me to pause?
No, it's just about, mine is synced with yours then.
Excellent.
Okay. So in that particular day, they had actually set 2 fires down in Quincy and then raced through the city. I guess there wasn't any traffic in the middle of the night or no construction on the expressway. Look at that first, that's the first piece of apparatus. It actually, look at it bouncing along in that dirt driveway there. And that came from Linfield, that first piece, because they had already set another fire that Chelsea was tied up with. This one here is actually a Chelsea, it's on the Everett line. And Everett was already busy at another multiple line fire that they set. So they actually got a fire truck from Linfield or something to come in. And look at the building. It's several hundred feet long, but this one's only a tall, 1-story, all wood structure. And it just burned top to bottom, left to right, end to end. There was no saving it. The fact is, firefighters have to maybe preserve any other structures nearby. So they're taking these fireboxes because if you're driving in, say, Roxbury or Dorchester in the middle of the night, that was about the only way to report it, a fire, is you actually pull over the side of the street, open the door to the little alarm box, and you could actually speak to fire alarm and actually talk to them and say, there's a fire at the corner of Quincy Ave and I don't know which other one, but and you could report your fire that way. Well, by stealing the box, then there's a delay in reporting, which means there's now a delay in response to that fire. And every minute a fire grows, it can double in size in the early stages. You can see a couple onlookers here. These guys aren't arsonists as far as I know. So Nat Whittemore is out there working, and he's doing his favorite hobby. He's getting paid to do what he loves to do, taking these pictures. Every one of these videos are his. And again, he has donated these videos, not only for my presentations, but for the potential for this to get to film. I do have an agent now, by the way. He's a literary film media rights agent slash attorney. And we have some serious negotiations going on with some famous Boston producer actors that you might have seen around who grew up in Dorchester, that type of thing. And a couple other people have contacted us lately who want to make documentaries out of this type of thing. This particular next fire that you're seeing where it's roaring again, this is just outside of Chinatown, downtown Boston, just on the other side, almost like on the South Boston side of the bridge cutting over to South Boston. This was a railroad building. They set fire, it was vacant. And this used to be like a control tower for the railroad yard where they would direct the trains coming in and leaving. And a funny thing happened on this night, and you could read about it, but I'll tell you a little bit here and there. These guys take a ride and wait for the fire call to come in before heading back and taking pictures and looking at the fires and stuff. They went into Chinatown to waste some time, and they went into the old combat zone, and a car accident happened right in front of them. One car ran a red light and T-boned another car. As first responders, they jumped out and tried to help any injured people. And the person who ran the red light happened to be a female who was very drunk. She actually tried to get away, so they restrained her until a cruiser, Boston PD cruiser with 2 police officers showed up, and they took her into custody. And the uniform officer turns to 2 of these arsonists and say, "Hey, there's a big fire right down the street. You should try to catch it." All they could do was smile, an inner smile. They had a lot of pride in setting these large fires. They became known as Mr. Flare and Friday Firebug, I mentioned earlier. Mr. Flare was a name that Greg Bemis took on. Nobody knows where the name came from. This fire, October 10, 1982. This is Marine Barracks or Enlisted Men's Club. Leftover from World War II. All of South Boston had a lot of military. The entire area was Navy and Marines and Army. And this was an old 2.5-story structure still there. They actually called in a bomb scare to Mass General Hospital because a Boston bomb squad office was directly next to this building. So to get them away from the area so they could set this fire, they called in a bomb scare. Can you believe that police and fire guys are doing this? They climbed up to a 2nd floor window and put the device up there, and they thought it wasn't going when they left. And they came back when the call came in, and it didn't look too impressive. They took off. Well, they didn't pay much attention because 22 firefighters got injured. You see this firefighter climbing back onto his ladder, but he was on the roof. The roof collapsed. Guys fell into the fire, luckily not into all the flames you saw. And they broke legs, they broke their backs, and you're going to see one get carted away in a moment. It's a guy who became a friend of ours, Manny Gregorio. He has 2 daughters on Boston Fire Alarm today. Manny never went back to work. He broke his back, and I asked him to be part of the Chronicle episode to see if he could give some insight from his point of view. Manny couldn't do it. He still has PTSD related to this fire. That's him getting carried out now and being put into the ambulance in a second. I don't know if mine is exactly synced up with yours. This is nightly entertainment for these guys, but this fire happened, and it was October 2nd. By the way, the date said the 10th. That's a mistake. It was October 2nd. October ended up being the 3rd most prolific month for these arsonists. They set about 30 fires that month. Obviously, most of them after this devastating fire on October 2nd. They had a meeting on October 3rd amongst themselves. We have to be more careful. We can't do this. Let's stick with the abandoned buildings. Well, 3 days later, they targeted another multiple story commercial structure. I don't understand what they're thinking, in the sense that more firefighters weren't going to get injured from this. That Cambridge fire, Polaroid building. It's an old wooden building with gas shingles. That's the nickname for the asphalt shingles that covered the outside of this building. You see the flames up near the far end? There were like 3 columns of flames. That's where the fire was actually set. Now, the arsonists have graduated from their device by adding something else. There's a lot of tires just thrown into empty lots. You see the flames coming up in like 3 columns? That's where they set this device. They added tires that are just thrown in vacant lots around Boston. They pick up 2 or 3 tires in a night. They place it up against a building. They put the device in the tire well. And once the tire got going, okay, here you can see the remnants. The steel belts now told us as investigators that we have the same people setting these fires. This now became the signature. The previous device that they were using was all burned up before, but now they left some rubber behind from some of the tread and the steel belts. Good friend of Nat Whittemore and mine, Ed Fowler, there with the baseball cap on, talking to a chief, showing how he found this there. And we've started finding that multiple times now. And it really helped us to believe that it's one group of people setting these fires. Well, what are the investigators doing all this time? We're running from fire to fire. Each fire has to be investigated as an individual event, unless you can start connecting them all. Now, by the time that Ed Fowler was showing that, there was 120 fires already set. And imagine Boston Arson Squad going to all these fires and trying to figure out how each one was set. Well, in abandoned buildings, you don't have the usual ignition sources. You don't have electrical. You don't have typically a smoking person, unless a homeless person's in there or something, or kids. You don't have cooking fires or heating related fires. So you can narrow it down fairly quickly, but you still have to prove it. And then when you get to these large commercial structures, you have to work it even deeper. They're a lot bigger. They're a lot harder to work. You have to interview the owners of buildings, the occupants of buildings, employees, disgruntled employees, laid off people. You have to interview witnesses like cab drivers who might have reported it, first firefighters who go in. There is a lot of work to each and every fire. And we were running around everywhere. We were getting nowhere. We had lists of suspects, maybe 18 people on a list. 2 of them we could take off the list, and tomorrow we add 2 more. Now, remember, Boston had 600 firefighters no longer on the job. Could it be, could you pause that when you got the Garrity lumber? November 21, Erin, please. Tell me when you got it paused.
Oh. Paused now.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to, Erin, if we can go back to the slides.
Certainly.
And then we'll get back to that fire. Okay.
Wait, would you like to share the slides or should I?
I can do it, I think. That way I can control it better. Let me X out of it for a second. I'm going to hit share screen. Okay. Whoop. Did it come up?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm just going to start from that current slide where we were in Dorchester on June 3rd. And I'll walk you right through. Sparrow Toy is in, again, this is Bill Noonan out there working. You can see that massive smoke plume. You can't even come close to seeing the length of the building. What you're seeing in this slide is only a fraction of the length of that 1,000-foot long building. The importance of this really got ATF involved as far as fire scenes go and more manpower. This was the very first time that the National Response Team from ATF, which was national response teams is 4 of those in the country also, Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, and Western teams. Um, the teams respond any place in the country within 24 hours of a major loss by fire or explosion, and whether it's monetary or loss of life. And in this case, actually 33 firefighters actually got hurt here, combined with the multi-million-dollar loss. As a matter of fact, Sparrow Toy Company moved to New Jersey with the loss of the warehouse jobs and other jobs here, and that income from taxes, that type of thing. They never reopened again in Massachusetts. So the National Response Team, this fire was on Friday, early Friday morning. The team was in town by Saturday, and we started working this fire on June 4th and June 5th. We have people who are experts in origin and cause, and I became a certified fire investigator later on in my career in 1988, and spent the rest of my time digging fire scenes. We had investigators out there doing interviews, taking pictures, taking evidence, etc. So the National Response Team assists state and locals, and usually invited, and Boston did invite us in. Another house fire. This little slide up here just lists June 11th on your left, and right there it's got a 9 alarm for Brookside Avenue, JP, 6 alarms for Dorchester Fire, 3 alarms for Sydney Street, and 5 alarms for Jamaica Plain, plus the several other fires they set that night. This is the Brookside Avenue fire. Look at that chief standing in front of the fire, walking in front of the fire. You can just imagine him shrugging his shoulders saying, what do I do with this? There's no other firefighters present at that fire scene because they were busy at some of the other fires that night. And this is the first time they set that building on fire. They did it again 2 or 3 months later because it was so big that there was a lot of building left to do again the second time. It's also the fire that's on the front of the book. It's another view of that same fire, another view, flames just roaring out of every upper floor opening. The reason that Norwood fire truck is here, engine, is because that is the Sydney Street fire, and that was the first company at that fire. There's Sydney Street. And I think this was the last fire set that night. I just love the way Bill Noonan caught the firefighter silhouetted with the flames in the background. You can see the second building to the right catching on fire. They set this particular fire down in the basement level, just on the just over the firefighter's right shoulder. That's back to Bartlett Street again. This was a YMCA, also on June 11th. My second daughter was born on June 25th. They set 6 multiple alarm fires that night. So I had my second daughter. My first daughter was only 14 months old. So you can imagine, spending time with my wife and my 2 young daughters, but yet I'm torn by the fires and getting back to work and trying to figure out what's going on. This actually is the Ziola Brothers building. You can see part of their name at the bottom of the screen to the right. It is 3 or 4 stories, but on the second floor was vacant, used to be Box 52 Fire Buffs, but the third floor was the Boston Sparks Association back in 1982. They lost a lot of memorabilia up there. These guys set that fire. Very detailed description of the planning for this particular fire, because 2 of the arsonists were still members of the group, and 2 of them had been scorned by the group and never admitted. And they hated the club and they wanted it burned. So they did burn it. This was January 1983. You can see snow at the bottom of the picture. That's what it's like working out there on those type of nights. It's kind of coincidental that my second wife, I've been married 25 years to my second wife. And Her father and her brother were both fire captains in Revere. And we met just coincidentally, it had nothing to do with fires. And my wife also, when my stepson was 5 years old, he's now 38, but when he was 5 years old, she lived in East Boston and lived through a fire that took out three triple deckers. Hers was the second one. And they had to come down the stairway from the third floor in the dark. And, you know, with the wind blowing in Eastie, it goes from one triple decker to the next. You imagine, okay, you see this building? That's directly across the street. I told you to pay attention to that wooded, the boarded up 4-story brick. That's directly across the street from the first fire. These firefighters look awful close to a building that's already falling down. The hazards of their job. Never mind breathing in all the bad stuff that they breathe in, but they can have collapsed buildings on top of them. They can fall into the buildings. They get trapped inside the buildings. They get burns. They get heat exhaustion the other day. They get frostbite in the wintertime. It is a hazardous job. I understand, you know, especially in the suburbs here, they might sit in the firehouse for several days at a time. They don't get a lot of multiple alarm fires, but when you do get the one and you do run to that fire and you save people, you don't know their names, you don't know their nationality, their race, their creed, their sexuality, etc. You save people and you put your life on the line each and every time. Look at Worcester. I've been to the Worcester fires. I was there for the Worcester warehouse fire. I stayed there 8 days, starting from the night of the fire until they recovered the last firefighter. And then the 9th and 10th day, we figured out what happened. This church fire in the South End, some amazing photographs. That is one of the most amazing pictures I've ever seen. That was a large circular stained glass window, the flames blowing out 10, 20 feet out. I mentioned these guys did a lot of crazy things. During the middle portion of the summertime, 1982, this letter was made up. The whole group decided to do this letter. Greg Bemis actually did the letter. It's like Hollywood. Cutouts from magazines, newspapers, etc. Pasted or taped all these words on there, these letters on there. I'm Mr. Flair. You know me as the Friday Firebug. I will continue till all deactivated police and fire equipment is brought back. Down in the bottom, if abandoned buildings are, actually said torn down, occupied buildings will be targeted. That is a threat. That letter was sent to WBZ, figuring that they would put it on TV. They wanted people to know what their motive was. Besides, they're not just pirate. These guys aren't pyromaniacs to begin with. They did it because of Prop 2.5. It became nightly entertainment. They got addicted to it. There's no doubt about it. They enjoyed doing it and really loved being out there and getting the attention from the press and fellow firefighters. They'd go to a fire picnic, a yearly picnic with the firefighters, and the guys would all talk about these fires, and these guys had it inside them, being proud in the sense that we set these fires. So this was sent to BZ, who called Boston Police or Fire, got picked up by Boston Fire, who brought it to Boston Police. It was fingerprinted, but nothing usable was gained, and it was put in a file drawer. ATF was never told about this letter for some reason. This is the last of the slides, and then I want to tell you how this case broke, and then we can get some questions. This was on Chronicle at the very end. I had asked Greg Bemis if he wanted to partake in the recording of Chronicle. He declined because he lives here in Massachusetts under another name, and he has a job, and his boss knows who he is. A lot of people know him by both first name, his first name and his new name. They know what he did. He went to prison, and he's out. And he said, I will answer questions on an email. I asked him, and he said he would. I didn't want to change his answers. I personally felt bad about I can't see because Wilmington Library is open. I'm going to reduce that. Okay. Injuries. But until the East Street Military Barracks fire, now that's October. They already had been at it for some 6, 7, 8 months. And there's been a lot of injuries already. Most of the injuries were minor in nature. Now, if there's firefighters in this crowd listening to me right now, and I've done this to live audiences, how many of you firefighters have been injured, but only minor, with a ceiling falling down on you? How close were you to being suffered a major injury or death? You know, it comes that close. Just because it's minor doesn't really mean that you should just poo-poo it. The members of the group of us foolishly rationalized that the good overrode the bad. In retrospect, that was my greatest regret. I truly believe to this day that the cutbacks would have been much worse in the passage of the Traeger bill. The Traeger bill was passed by Governor King. It gave money back to the cities and towns to try to get the laid off people back on the job. That would not have happened had it not been for our regrettable action some 35 years ago. I won't say anything more about what Greg answered here. I'll let you people decide for yourselves how you feel about that. And again, Greg and I have a relationship still today. He has still given me additional information that I can give to some of my talking events. And we're friendly. I don't invite him to my house, but I've been to his. It's an unusual relationship. Can we get out of that and go back to the video?
Certainly, let me do that. Would you like me to hit play?
Please. Mine's not quite there. You're seeing the Garrity Lumber Yard. They hit it twice. They hit it in October, and then they hit it November 21. I worked that scene October and again in November. 2 devices were placed by Robert Gablewski, the Boston police officer, and Greg Bemis. They were dropped off by other guys. And then they drove around for a while, and then when the call came in, they came back to spark the fire. That's a term, to watch the fire, along with lots of other people. We did not know these guys in particular as suspects, but Nat Whittemore knew who they were, and Ed Fowler, and they didn't like them because they were a strange crew, and they'd say certain things. Now that's what you're seeing in your picture. There is piles, stacks of plywood. Normally it doesn't burn too well because they're all pressed together, but as you can see between all of them, there's lots of flames. That flame went up 100 feet above the building, and there was also shingles in where they set the second fire. Several firefighters got hurt here, and glad to say none of them too seriously. But what's so important about this fire is Nat Whittemore is there filming this, and he comes around a lumber pile, and he hears the noise. And that's Robert Gablewski waving his firearm. He pulls it out of his shoulder holster, waves it in the air like he's on a bucking bronco. Greg Bemis was standing off to the side. Donald Stackpole, the security guard owner, was the one squatting on the pile. Joe Gorman, he worked down at Quincy Shipyard, was to Gablewski's right, and they looked over to the right several times because Ray Norton was on another lumber pile out of view. So when Gablewski waved his gun, and Nat Whittemore for a second thought he was pulling it out and maybe going to aim it at him. That's the last of that. So you can just X out of that and come back to my face, I guess.
All right, video's ended.
How do I get just my face up there? Can people see me?
Yes, yep.
Okay, good. So when Gablewski waved that gun in the air, it focused Nat's attention, and he videoed this crew, and nobody really knew Bemis's name. Nobody knew Gorman. They knew Stackpole. They knew Gablewski because he was a cop, and they knew Ray Norton. So within a couple of days, my partner, Bill Murphy, and myself knocked on Grabluski's Weymouth apartment door. He was home, invited us in. We sat in his living room. We tried to interview him, law enforcement to law enforcement, fellow criminal justice people. Can you help us out? Do you know what's going on? Do you know who's setting any of these fires? He said, no, I'm just a fire buff. He said, I'm a spark. I just love running to fires. And these other guys, they're all my buddies. So he just lied right to our face. Sitting on his floor, about 10 feet away from us, is one of those fireboxes. And as we're getting ready to leave, Billy very calmly puts on his trench coat that he always wore. And he walked over and said, oh, my grandfather used to make bird cages out of there, bird feeders, lamps out of these things. That's pretty cool that you have one. And Billy was just got the number right on the front, box 1712. He and I raced back into Boston. We both live south of Boston. It's now 9 o'clock at night. We raced back into Boston because under his desk blotter, he had a list of the fireboxes stolen that year or missing. On average, Boston is missing 1 or 2 boxes per year. 1982, they were missing 14. That's how many of these guys stole. And the first firebox missing that year, box 1712 from Roxbury, right there in Bobby's living room. That is stolen property. Not a real big deal, but if you're a police officer, it kind of stings a little bit. We got a local search warrant. Boston PD wasn't happy. They sent a couple detectives with us, and Weymouth had a couple of police officers in uniform. And we knocked on Bobby's door the next night. He wasn't home. We got let in by the management. The box was still sitting on the floor. Now here we are asking this arsonist about his involvement or his knowledge, and he lies to us, and he can see from us coming to him and being out there investigating that we're getting a little closer. You think he might have done something with that firebox? Nope, we got no respect. He just left it right there. So we got that. But Boston PD said, okay, we're out of here. You got your firebox. The warrant allowed us to look any place else in the apartment for other items that may be related to this arson spree that was going on. So we did eventually leave. We didn't find anything else. And Bobby got put up in dispatch. They took his gun away while Boston investigated. Now, catch this. Billy's father-in-law was the head of the Boston Internal Affairs Unit. And Billy's father-in-law said, Billy, you are persona non grata here now because you're going after one of ours. Now, that is what happened in police work a lot, protecting your own. They did not want to see that whatsoever. So Bobby gets put up there, and they're doing an internal affair investigation. He came in for a polygraph the first week of December 1982. He came in with an attorney, and he failed miserably. I don't know what game he was going to try to pull on us, but he failed. We tried talking to him. His attorney told me he can't talk. And what's that mean? Is somebody going to kill him? He's going to lose his job? No, he can't talk. And they walked out. That's the last time we talked to Bobby. That was December 1982. We spoke to him next in January 1984, 14 months later. But during 1983, we were out knocking on the doors of some of the other guys. Wayne Sandin is a name I haven't told you. It's another Wayne involved in this case. Wayne Sandin was a Boston Housing Police lieutenant. When I knocked on his door, it was the same type of thing. Wayne, you're police, I'm law enforcement. You have 2 kids and a wife. I have 2 kids and a wife. Man to man, is there anything you can tell me? He says, no, nothing right now, but I'll be glad to help you. And eventually he started giving me tidbits. Wayne was a very strange character. He gave me information about a stolen car that these guys burned. One that was just sitting in South Boston with the wheels pulled off, the tires, radio, items stolen out of the car, an abandoned vehicle. That made me yawn. There's nothing I'm going to do with the car. And then he said they burned a car that caught onto a building. And then he said they were going to burn some other security company cars. So we wired them one night, and the wire didn't work too well. And we had a recorder on him. That didn't work at all. We wondered why. Because he was a double agent. He kept shutting it off when he was going to have conversation with these guys. But Wayne told us in August 1983 about a car. Now, I told you these guys were crazy. They do a lot of things like the Mr. Flair letter, stealing fireboxes, calling in a bomb scare. They called in several times to several fire departments in the outer towns, Fitchburg, Canton. They called just to say the Mr. Flair, the Boston Friday Firebug, is in town, because they wanted it to be known that they were setting those fires. But they stole a brand new cruiser out of Natick Ford for their own purposes. These guys rode around in unmarked cruisers, their own personal cars, the black LTDs, Chevys, black walls, antennas, that type of thing. And they wanted to update their own personal cruiser with some parts from this new Randolph unmarked cruiser. That's who it was going to go to, was Randolph. And then they dumped it into the Fort Point Channel. They didn't even think about recycling that car. They dumped it into the channel. Well, for some reason, Wayne Sandin told me about this. And we had a dive team from Boston Police and Fire go down, and we recovered that car. Eventually, in January 1984, we went to speak to Grabluski again, and at Boston Police headquarters. And there were several of us in the room, and I'm not going to tell you the exact wording. It's very dramatic, and it's going to be in the movie. It's in the book. You can picture this whole scene in an office space in the old Boston Police headquarters. But Bobby confessed that night to about 30 fires. My stomach started churning in my head. I had a headache from all the information he was spitting out. And he confessed. And the next day he went to federal court and had an attorney, and we couldn't speak to him again until May, when he finally decided with a new attorney to come on board. And we wired him 17 times to do undercover phone calls and meetings with these guys. We had so much great information that in July 1984, we finally arrested the rest of the crew. The ninth guy who got into this did not set a fire. He was out in Ohio, and Donald Stackpole and some other members wanted to get Grabluski out of here, let him run from this jurisdiction, not go to jail. He had pled guilty. They knew that, and he said, "I'm going to go to prison. I'll keep my mouth shut." And they believed him. He lied to them during all these undercover meetings, and he said, "Oh, okay, I'll go out to Ohio, and this guy out there will take care of me." And they're the ones who brought the idea up to him. And he actually spoke to that guy on the phone. We recorded that conversation. He says, "Yeah, I'll take care of you." So he became a co-conspirator. And so he's the ninth guy that got involved. And eventually, all of them, except for one, went to prison. The only one who didn't was Lenny Kendall, who grew up with Bemis out in Acton Stowe. He was present for the first two fires, did not set a fire. He went into the Air Force, luckily for him, and he left for basic training, and he became a firefighter in the Air Force when we had him arrested. And he pled guilty, and he got 5 years probation and got kicked out of the Air Force. But everybody else went to prison. The longest sentence was 40 years for Donald Stackpole. He was the meanest son of a gun in this group. When those firefighters got hurt at the East Street Barracks, he said, "Shame on them. It's their own fault. They shouldn't have been on the roof. Too many guys up there." That says everything you need to know about Donald Stackpole. He did 22 years out of that. Now, back then, sentencing guidelines allowed you to be eligible for parole after 10 years. Greg Bemis signed an agreement for 30 years. Even so, he testified brilliantly in 2 trials. And he cooperated fully Robert Gablewski was the first one in the door. He got a 12-year sentence and did 10. Bemis got 30 years and he did just over 10. Sandin, what a fool he was. He never told me that he was present and participated in 50 building fires. Ever. He didn't even tell me after we arrested him. Why was he giving me this information to keep me going and keep me on the hook and keep us investigating? If he had shut up completely, we would have had a much more difficult time to make this case. But because Nat Whittemore took that picture at Garrity Lumber and then the recovered auto that they stole, when we interviewed Gablewski in January '84 and used that against him, and said that now he's going to be charged with felonies and now he's going to lose his job and he is going to go to jail, then he confessed. And who came to our office in the middle of the night that night? We called the U.S. attorney to make sure we were doing everything right. And who showed up that night was Robert Mueller, Bob Mueller, that you know from the investigation that happened all of last year, type of thing, into the Russia involvement, etc. He went on to head the FBI and became a big attorney down in DC. So I am going to end that there, leaving up to about 10 minutes of questions. Hi.
Hello. Excellent. So if anyone would like to enter some questions in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen, and we do have one in there. Was this group responsible for the fire which destroyed the Stowe Fire Academy?
Oh, yes, that's another quick story. Donald Stackpole suggested that to Greg Bemis because Greg lived out in Acton and Stowe. He worked out there too. And Greg decided to do it all by himself. So he did that. He parked across the street. He ran over there and got into the building. And he opened up an overhead door and stole several breathing apparatus, SCBA type things, Scott packs, and ran across the street carrying 2. They're heavy. And then he carried 2 more, and then he took 1 more. I think he took 5 altogether. And then he set fire to the building. He is solely responsible, and he's proud of it, believe it or not, that we have a nice new fire academy because of him.
Wow. Yes, get your questions into the QA or the chat. And I have a question. I know that arson must be one of the hardest kinds of crime to solve. By its nature, the evidence is burnt when you get there. Having been in the field the time you had, have you seen a lot of advancements in fire investigation?
I'm glad you asked that, actually. The accelerant detection canines come in 1986, so after this case. And ATF helped develop that program. The detection canines, you know, their olfactory senses are so much greater than a human. And they're trained for about 15 to 20 combustible liquids to detect it. Like, they won't detect the asphalt shingles that are made from petroleum products, but they will detect gasoline, kerosene, and other products like that. And let me tell you, I've seen them work. I wiped my boot into a drip that was out in the tar, a drip of gasoline. I wiped my boot, walked around for a bit, sat on a wall, and then I asked the canine state trooper who had it, canine, and I asked him to walk by all of us sitting on the wall, and he hit it right on that boot. So we have that. We have DNA now. You'd be surprised that DNA could be on something. Like Thomas Sweat down in Washington, D.C. was actually captured because he brought his device in a plastic bag and dropped it at the scene, and they got his DNA off the bag. So there's things like that. The training has been so intense. We've had classes at the University of Maryland, which is a fire science program there. And the books that are out now and the science behind fires. When I first came on, I was taught by senior guys who said, Wayne, look at that fire pattern. that fire pattern's caused by this. Well, they had no science to back it up. They had only the experience, and we used to say it was an art more than a science. Well, let me tell you, fire patterns change every single second in a fire. And that fire pattern that might be on a carpet can be caused by melting plastic rather than gasoline or something like that. And a lot of the old myths we have now debunked because we now have science and we can back that up. And it has just progressed so much. Now, this particular case, think about it, folks, with all the surveillance cameras all over the place nowadays, it would have caught these guys at some point. They almost got caught 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times as it was, but they managed to work their way out of it each time. How about GPS, cell phone, social media? In your car, there's a little black box that once we got on them as suspects back in late 1982, we could have followed them much easier. But we couldn't follow these guys. They're all trained law enforcement type people who will be looking for tails, and they're out in the middle of the night in places where there's virtually nobody around. So we couldn't trail them back then, but today it could be done because it can be done from afar in a sense. So that was a good question, Erin.
Thank you. And another question, I know that in this instance, many of the people attached were either tangentially worked for the fire department or the PD or were part of clubs like the Sparks. Have you found that to be common in your line of work?
Well, not really. We've had call firefighters around. I mentioned John Orr at the beginning. John Orr was this long time. He was like the most famous investigator in the state of California, and he kept during these conferences that we'd have every year. He'd drive from his territory down to where the conference was, and there'd be fires set along the way and on the way back at the end and things like that. And they started seeing this pattern, and so he was the most prolific law enforcement type because he was a fire marshal in a sense. I had some call firefighters down in Wareham that were setting it just so they could get to other fires, but very rarely do you get too many police or fire guys involved. It might be more on the call firefighters only because they want some more action or get paid to go out there, that type of thing.
Sure. And then one question I'd just like to ask all the authors we have in our author series, especially those that write nonfiction, is really kind of about the process. How long did it take you to write? I know you addressed some of this in the beginning, and did you find it difficult to write kind of your own story?
And this particular, I'm writing my second book now, which is actually short stories. It's going to be some gun cases. I had a 46 machine gun case, some bombing cases. A Boston police officer got killed by a bomb, and an amazing weird case out in Western New York where a guy in his 50s had a girlfriend, and family didn't like him. So he sent bombs to her entire family, killing 5 of her family members. That's going to be in there, and a bunch of other fire cases. This one's a little more difficult because I have to research more and interview more people. I mean, they're all part of my cases. I mean, I worked each one of these, so I have personal knowledge, but I want some more surrounding what I know of the cases. And Google nowadays, the one in Western New York, I found 45 pages that helped me write that particular story. But the words for this story, Burn Boston Burn, just flowed from me. The Bemis thing, I actually had to start, I had 177,000 words. I got it down to 151,000, but it's still 480 pages long, the words flowed too well, and I had to cut back because there is a lot of repetition. Some of the readers will see in the middle of summer, there's repetition, but I left some of if the fires weren't spectacular or special, I cut it down to a sentence or 2 sentences for a fire, but I left some of that because I wanted people to see that repetition, how we were repeating. We were doing the same thing every day. And these bad guys were doing the same things every day, you know? Um, but the story was in my head for a long time before that Boston Globe reporter finally gave me that impetus to get out there and start banging away. Like I said, I started at the end of January, and by Christmas, I had my 177,000 words. And it was well organized. Nothing's changed except reducing it down and editing down. So
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Wayne. I know that I'll be keeping an eye out for your short stories and also for the film possibilities for Burn Boston Burn. I'm sure we'll be keeping an eye out for that.
I see another question came up, but there's something before I forget. I want your readers, your viewers, and the people here listening, to know that I do donate 50% of my profits to fire victim charities. My website, I put it on Facebook today too. So far, I've donated $3,000, but I now have a bundle of money, and I'm planning on doing another 3,000 soon. And I've given it to burn camps, like for kids who got canceled this year. All these kids were burned, and this gives them a week away together with disfigurements and stuff, so nobody's looking at them strange, and they can have counseling at the same time, that type of thing. And some of these burn camps are local, and some are going to be all the way across the country. But if you can do that one question, I don't know if you have time for it.
Sure, and I will point out we do have the link in the chat to Wayne's website, burnbostonburn.com, if you would like to buy a signed copy that goes towards a worthy cause there. The last question in the chat, are there many retired firefighters still around that were working during the time of these fires?
There are quite a few. You know, you imagine it's 35 years since they went to prison already. I'm almost, you know, I'm approaching 70 years old in a couple more years. So, and I was a youngster back then. I was only 30 years old. So there are a few. And again, I meet these guys at Boston Sparks Association. My first speaking event had 200 at Florian Hall, which is the Boston Firefighters Union Hall. And I had 200 people there, and so many of them were Boston and other firefighters who lived through this period. And people hit me up on Facebook and LinkedIn, my email, etc. It's so much fun to meet these people and talk to them about their side of the story.
Excellent. Thank you. I know we'll have something to look forward to, look out for, be it movie or the next book. Thank you so much for sharing your story and those amazing photos by Bill Noonan there.
Thank you so much for having me, folks. And I enjoyed it, even if I couldn't see your faces. But you all take care. Stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Yes, absolutely.